Political movements during the 20th century played a key role in defining First Amendment freedoms and civil liberties. Dissent was rarely tolerated by the federal government.
Up until the First World War, the role of the First Amendment in limiting governmental power was not well developed. In fact, the First Amendment and the right to free speech was really not something that was discussed much even during the Civil War period.
During the build-up to World War I, the nation was tense. Immigration from Europe was on the rise. In 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution brought communism to Russia. Public fear in the U.S. about radical politics and the loyalties of new immigrants was easy to exploit. Concerns escalated as labor unions stepped up the campaign for social change.
Remember, the United States is not simply going to war for practical reasons. We're going to war for our whole sense of national destiny, the culmination of all that's good in America. There's no room for dissent. So many of the progressives viewed the war with suspicion. There were many more radical groups, the socialists, the IWW, the industrial workers of the world, very, very radical component in American political and labor dynamics. They criticized it because they said it was just a war of capitalism.
President Wilson argued that the world must be made safe for democracy. Many historians contend the Wilson administration did not fight for the same freedoms at home. Nationalist sentiment peaked with the passage of the Espionage Act in 1917 and the Sedition Act in 1918.
Most of the cases that have formed the basis for our First Amendment freedoms today came from the First World War period, in which the Congress enacted laws that were upheld, that made it illegal to question the war effort, that made it illegal to oppose any governmental activity that might have something to do with making it more difficult for the war effort to go forward.
There are a number of small arrests all over the country. It's against the law to send any kind of dissenting material through the mails. You can't in any way object to the draft. You cannot in any way pass materials on to young soldiers or enlisted men. And some major figures are arrested.
In 1918, socialist presidential candidate Eugene Debs received a 10-year prison sentence for voicing his opposition to war. The Espionage Act undermined the anti-war movement and the socialist political movement. Milwaukee Congressman Victor Berger was convicted of sedition and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The decision was later reversed by the Supreme Court.
In the United States, disagreement with authority took a more violent form.
Following the war, the country was further unsettled by a wave of bombings directed at prominent individuals.
There's rampant inflation. There's unemployment. There's some major strikes. There's a massive general strike in Seattle. So you have foreign language communists and socialists advocating for Bolshevism. Finally, there is violence.
One of the targets was Attorney General Mitchell Palmer. Politicians and law enforcement officials demanded that action be taken. Palmer directed federal agents to round up any group advocating communist politics.
Were they communists or were they the socialists? Probably not. They were probably anarchists who have been involved in bombings since the 1880s, but that sort of distinction is pretty subtle. Whenever they talk about the Palmer raids among historians, they're viewed as one of the very darkest moments in American history. And they truly are. Thousands of people were arrested, most of whom had absolutely nothing to do with radicalism. One of the problems is that Palmer gets so ahead of himself, he declares that he has, somehow this is very relevant today, he has evidence of a massive attempt to overthrow the government on May Day in 1920. There's going to be bombings, there's going to be assaults on buildings, there's going to be people trying to take over the Capitol. May Day comes and goes. I'm sorry, it's just May Day. And everybody goes, Mr. Palmer, what is this all about?
The ACLU was born of a civil liberties crisis, the Palmer raids, around the time of World War I, where people who were thought to be communists were rounded up and deported without any due process of law. Well, we thought that was wrong. We thought that due process, meaning an opportunity to be heard, to show that you're not the person who the government thinks you are, is essential.
When Hitler's troops began their march across Europe, Congress responded to perceived threats at home with the passage of the Smith Act. It was the first peacetime sedition law since 1798.
Uncle Sam starts a national register of aliens, and here are some of the 4 million foreigners who've been...
Under the Smith Act, all alien residents in the United States more than 14 years of age were required to register with the government and file a record of their political beliefs. Just days after the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt made an historic speech.
We will not, under any threat or in the face of any danger, surrender the guarantees of liberty our forefathers framed for us in our Bill of Rights.
Despite Roosevelt's rhetorical defense of civil liberties, free speech was dramatically curtailed during World War II. Press censorship was reintroduced within 2 weeks of the Pearl Harbor attack. Roosevelt issued Executive Order number 8985, authorizing the creation of an Office of Censorship. The government banned membership in organizations it considered subversive, and several Nazi sympathizers were convicted and imprisoned. In some schools, teachers were even asked to take oaths of loyalty to the United States. But little compares to Roosevelt's signing of Executive Order number 9066. With the swipe of his pen, more than 120,000 American citizens and registered aliens of Japanese ancestry were taken from their homes and placed under guarded detention. Most lost their homes and personal property.
During World War II, the United States incarcerated Japanese Americans in camps for their own protection, it said. And yet the machine guns guarding the camps, they weren't pointed out, they were pointed in. Approximately 30 years later, our government apologized. We're trying to have a country where we don't have to apologize for our conduct during a crisis.
We like our patriotism to be open and proud, and our patriotism is supposed to be above suspicion. And that's where I think the tension comes from. If times are good and there are no external threats, then we're more relaxed about whatever dissonance that immigration produces. If it's a time of hardship, recession, or foreign threat, that's when we become concerned about the immigrants that maybe only 5 years before we had welcomed.
The reality is that it's not possible to have a constitutional system in which we set out to diminish the rights and the ability of some portion of the population to participate in the society and not have it affect everyone. It's very difficult to see that on a daily basis, but history has, I think, confirmed that that is the fact of the matter, and really defines the social responsibility we have to make certain that we not lose sight of that.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
The World War II alliance had created strange bedfellows between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. It wasn't long before pragmatic allies turned into fearful enemies.
Addressing the Federal Bar Association.
In 1947, President Truman swore to defeat communism worldwide and at home.
If we all work together to maintain and strengthen our democratic ideals, communism will never be a serious threat to our American way of life. The example we set for free men everywhere.
Under Executive Order number 9835, he introduced the Federal Loyalty Program to root out subversives and other disloyal Americans. In 1 year, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI investigated more than 2 million government employees.
Alger Hiss, one-time high government official, will lose all civil rights after a year in prison.
Two high-profile cases rocked the nation. Former State Department official Alger Hiss was convicted as a Soviet spy.
The fate of each man and of others hangs in the balance.
Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were convicted of stealing nuclear secrets for the Soviets. They were executed at Sing Sing Federal Prison in 1953.
The ring was first uncovered following...
There was something almost irrational about the seduction of communism that made it even a worse threat than the totalitarianism of fascism. Fascism seemed to be tied to national views. Communism, as communists often said, was international. It could happen everywhere.
In a series of dawn raids, FBI agents swooped down on communists indicted on charges of advocating the violent overthrow of the government.
As red fear gripped the nation, Congress passed the McCarran Act to target both immigrants and American citizens whom the government determined were communist sympathizers.
Pictures were made.
We've got to clean out those who are responsible, Mr. Chairman. In conclusion, those who are responsible, either knowingly or because they were simple dupes, covering up communists and traitors, not dead ones but live ones.
Though the term McCarthyism quickly entered the nation's lexicon, red baiting was actually a bipartisan practice with a long history. Wisconsin's Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy was simply the most adept at fanning the flames of intolerance.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. Even if there are only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
Though slow to react, the American public finally pushed Congress to end the paranoia.
The growing practice of character assassination is already curbing free speech, and it is threatening all our other freedoms. For I know you have no way of telling when some unfounded accusation may be hurled at you, perhaps straight from the halls of Congress.
There really are some parallels that we have to draw between the current era and what happened in the 1950s. And I like to think that after the fact, that after time, after the dust had settled, that the country has been able to turn around and say, wait a minute, we did something very wrong.
The walls are real weak. Anybody that's close to these buildings are in danger.
Like the Patriot Act, the 1996 Anti-Terrorism Act, enacted during the Clinton administration, was a response to subversive attack. In fact, many of the provisions of the Patriot Act were already in place following the 96 legislation. For example, the 96 legislation gave the executive branch the power to criminalize fundraising for lawful activities conducted by organizations it labeled terrorist. It allowed the FBI to open investigations based on First Amendment activity. And it established a special court that could use secret evidence to deport non-citizens accused of association with terrorist groups.
Arab Americans are racially profiled in what's called secret evidence. People are stopped, and we got to do something about that.
Granting authority to deport non-citizens on the basis of secret evidence remained controversial. It was the subject of debate during the 2000 presidential elections, with then-candidate George W. Bush voicing criticism.
Arab Americans are treated with respect. So racial profiling isn't just an issue at local police forces. It's an issue throughout our society, and as we become a diverse society,